ahead and start the recording, that would be awesome.
All set.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Same Center webinar. My name is Luis Perez. I'm a technical assistance specialist with the National AEM Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. This is the fifth and final webinar of a five-part series that we've been doing on the quality indicators for the provision of AEM. Before we begin, there's a few things I want to let you know about our Zoom environment so you can get the most out of this webinar. First of all, there is a page where you can download the materials for this webinar. It's found at bit.ly/QI5 and then page in all caps. And a big thank you to Leslie O'Callaghan from the AEM Center and Cass, who will be posting some of these links in the chat area. We are live captioning this webinar. To view those closed captions, make sure that you find the closed caption option in your Zoom window, in your Zoom controls. And then you'll see the captions appear along the bottom of the Zoom window when any of the panelists are speaking. And a big thank you to Mary for providing those captions today. We really appreciate your services. Of course, you play a big role in making this webinar a success, and we would love to hear your thoughts and ideas. We would love to have you contribute to the conversation. And the way that you will do that is through the chat feature in Zoom. If you don't see the chat area, look for that option in your chat, your Zoom interface. And then there's one more thing you need to do. There is a pull-down menu in the chat area. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees. That way you're not just communicating with one person, but you're communicating with everyone in the room so everybody can see what you type. And also, we would appreciate it if there are any insights, any new understandings that you gain from this webinar, please tweet it out through social media. We're on Twitter. We're at AEM_center. And we also ask that you use the hashtag AEM and the number 4 and then all, ALL. So that will help other people learn from this webinar as well through social media. We do have you all muted for this webinar. But again, the chat area is the best way to contribute to the conversation. We are hoping to have some time at the end as well for some live Q&A. But throughout the webinar, if you have a question or a comment, please share that through the chat. All right, so as I said, this is the fifth and final webinar in this five-part series that we've been focusing on the quality indicators for K-12. So just to recap, I want to give you sort of a quick overview of where this webinar fits in terms of the series. Today we're going to be focusing on the last of the quality indicators, number 7, which is allocation of resources. And on the screen, we have a list of all 7 of the quality indicators. And Leslie has also shared a link to the webpage on our center's website where you can learn more. So those quality indicators are a coordinated system. It's number 1, timely manner. It's number 2, written guidelines. Number 3, a comprehensive learning opportunities and technical assistance is number 4. And then systemic data collection and then the use of that data to guide changes. Those are number 5 and 6. And then the one that we're going to be focusing on today, which is allocation of resources. We have a set of icons on our website for each of these quality indicators. And then there's one icon that brings them all together. And the icon represents each of the quality indicators as a gear. And these gears are all touching each other because the quality indicators are interdependent. Just one of these quality indicators alone can be powerful, but they're even more effective, more powerful when they're working together in sync. And so that's what that icon is meant to indicate, that there is some interdependence between the quality indicators. So real quick, the objectives for this webinar is for you to be able to explain in your own words what the intent behind quality indicator number 7 is, and then to learn from the experiences and practices of other states so that you can provide human, fiscal, and infrastructural resources for AIM and accessible technology systems. And then also to know where to go to build more background knowledge and have a number of resources for further learning about the quality indicators. So we're being joined today by a number of great presenters. I'm not going to introduce them all right now. They're going to introduce themselves when we get to their section of the webinar. But we're being joined by Joy Lyons and Maggie Pickett. They're coming to us from Iowa. And Joy Lyons is the AIM coordinator at the Bureau of Learner Strategies and Supports of the Iowa Department of Education. Maggie is a digital learning consultant at the Grantwood Area Education Agency. And then we're also being joined by Angela Stamridge from Texas, and she's an education specialist with the Region 4 Education Service Center. So each of them will tell you a little bit more about themselves when we get to that part of the webinar. So let's take a look at quality indicator number 7, which is the focus of this webinar. With quality indicator 7, the agency allocates resources sufficient to ensure the delivery and sustainability of quality services to learners with disabilities who need accessible materials and technologies, or AIM. And one of the words that's not in bold there, but that is key for this quality indicator, is sustainability. So how do we create a system that is sustainable and that will be around for a number of years to provide learners with the AIM, the access to the educational materials and technologies that they need? And the icon here shows a sort of a circular flow between a human figure, a dollar sign to indicate money, and a clock to represent time. And the human figure is, of course, the human resources. So those are the 3 things that we are going to focus on: the fiscal, human, and infrastructure resources that are needed in order to make sure that learners' needs are appropriately addressed. And there's a process for doing that involves the determination of need, the provision of appropriate accessible materials and technologies, and the delivery of services so that we can make the most out of those materials and technologies. And of course, learning opportunities to make sure that people know how to use those services, those technologies, and those materials. Now on the AIM Center website, each of these quality indicators is explained in more detail. And for each of them, there are some critical components as well. And you'll find a number of resources to support your understanding of that quality indicator. So for number 7, you'll find that resources need to be allocated in a variety of different ways. Of course, time and money, right? Those are usually the biggest components that we need to pay attention to if we want to have a sustainable system. So fiscal and human resources, but we also want to make sure that we have infrastructure in place. And a big part of that is making sure that there is institutional knowledge about policies and resources, so that as people change, as roles change, that institutional knowledge remains in order to address the needs of all learners. All right, and so just to make sure that we're clear on some of the terms that we're going to be using today, depending on where you live, depending on your state, you may see the term AIM, AEM, or you may see the term AIM. AEM, let me start with the AIM first, because that came first. AIM stands for Accessible Instructional Materials, and this goes back to IDEA 2004, and it's referring primarily to print-based instructional materials. AEM is a little bit broader, and it expands on that definition to include digital materials as well. So it's both print and tech-based materials. So AEM stands for Accessible Educational Materials, and it reflects how these materials have changed over the years, so that now it's not just print, but we're thinking about websites, podcasts, apps, all of those things that are part of our digital culture. However, in practice, a lot of people use these interchangeably because what's important here is the goal. And the goal is to make sure that learners have the materials and technologies that they need in order to be successful and achieve their goals. So sometimes people use AIM, sometimes they'll use AIM. What's important is the end goal, which is success for all of our learners, especially those that have challenges for their learning. So let's go ahead and just do a quick reflection before I turn it over to our excellent presenters for today. To what extent, so you can answer this in the chat. Again, if you don't see the chat, there is a button in your Zoom window, and make sure that you have all panelists and attendees selected. So the prompt is, to what extent is Quality Indicator 7 addressed in your own provision of materials and technologies for students? And the options are not started, somewhat, or you're really cooking. And the icon here is a human figure who is kind of tapping a pen on their mouth as they're thinking. There's a thought bubble that shows the light bulb for an idea. So go ahead and, using the chat, let us know, where are you in terms of Quality Indicator 7 and the allocation of resources? So Jane says somewhat plus. So what does the plus mean, Jane? So somewhere in between somewhat and really cooking, right? And don't be shy. This is, there's no right or wrong answers. Brian says same, somewhat moving along. John says somewhat. Kay, hey Kay. Kay is joining us from Florida, really cooking, but could always use more money. Absolutely. Jessica says somewhat. And then Jane comments, not all districts are getting it, but ones that do have it down and understand. Well, that's great to hear. So now the goal is really to get more and more people on board. So it's more widespread, more systemic, right? And she responds, right. So that's what we're seeking with these quality indicators, is to make sure that some of these practices are more systemic. They're more intentional and more systemic as well. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so, just in case you have a thought that pops into your head related to this prompt. And then we will go ahead and continue on to our presenters. All right, well, thanks so much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts in the chat. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. I forgot to say that at the beginning. And we will be posting the recording in about a week. We post it on the AIM Center website, and we generally post that recording in the same page where you register for the webinar. And so that recording will have closed captions included with it. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and good friend, Angela from Texas. So Angela, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, and then I would be advancing the slides for you. So just let me know when it's okay to continue.
I will do that. Good afternoon. My name is Angela Standridge. I'm a speech pathologist by training, but I've been doing assistive technology for about 35 years. To kind of explain the architecture of Texas a little bit, there are 20 education service centers spread throughout the state. Region 4 is the one in Houston, and we also hold the responsibility for maintaining the Texas Assistive Technology Network, which is a project that supports the whole state. So I have responsibilities locally in Houston to my customer districts, providing training, professional development, technical assistance in assistive technology. And then I also have responsibilities for the whole state in supporting assistive technology and the acquisition of devices and services. You can advance. The only graphic I have is the state of Texas, because I was not clever and didn't make it very cute. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Texas Education Agency and their acquisition of accessible materials. What's significant about Texas is the whole movement for accessible materials came out of general education. So the fact that it was a movement from general ed and not special ed, I think kind of made us maybe move the needle forward a little bit more. So the whole impetus from this came with the provision of instructional materials. So in Texas, districts get an allotment of funds, for textbooks and technology and other things. And the state of Texas vets collections of curricular materials and makes them available on this list you can buy from. Now, a district, this is the land of local control in Texas, so a district can choose to purchase something off the list. The TEA, or the Texas Education Agency, is saying that if you purchase from this list, we're assuring that it's connected to our standards and objectives. We're assuring that it's accessible. We have vetted this information, so if you buy from this list, you're safe. So you can go ahead and advance the link on this slide, and it's also in your handout, will take you to the instructional materials launch page, and a subsection of the launch page for instructional materials on the TEA site is the accessible materials site. So now you can advance that. So what's particularly different with Texas is they have decided through we have proclamations for the rules for the acquisition of these materials. There's one for every year, looking at the materials we're getting for that year. And every year since, I believe, 2018, they've kind of upped the bar on what they declare in the proclamation. So first of all, when Texas is looking at publishers, we tell them, first of all materials on the procurement list purchased with state allocated funds have to be accessible. So for a publisher to get on the list, they first have to be accessible. Then they must guarantee that accessibility by having a third-party audit of their materials. They can't just say, oh, we're accessible. And as many of you may know, when a publisher says accessible, that may or may not really play out in the actual classroom. Sometimes they just provide a PDF or a website, and it may not have those accessible structures built into it. So they have to guarantee accessibility, third-party audit, they provide their materials to the NIMAC, and they have to provide a company contact for accessibility issues. Because what every year we kind of learn something new and added another piece to this. And so when the company says, yes, it's accessible, yes, we've had a third-party audit, and here's what the information says, and then somebody actually goes to use it in the classroom, and there's still an issue of some kind, you would go back and say, well, who do I call? And you call the publisher, and oh, that's so-and-so in this department or that department. You can never find the person where the buck stops. So to be included in the list, they have to have this final piece of having a contact person named so that either TEA or the local LEA, if they're having issues, can contact them and resolve those issues quickly, because the students can't access the material if they can't access the content that's being provided by that publisher. And then the other caveat is if districts purchase outside that list, if they can, local control, Texas, they are responsible for ensuring that accessibility. There's kind of a little bit of an urban legend about this happened with one district. There was one advanced calculus class, and this particular teacher had to have this specific textbook, and it was not on the list. And they had a student with a disability that needed an accessible version, and that district had to pay to provide that. It was a student with a visual impairment, and it was very, very costly for that district. So after that, the news spread rapidly, and so now districts are much more cautious about that. Or if they are going to purchase something outside of the list, they now know to go and look at that proclamation and say, we demand these same things from that publisher. We have several resources for them to look at that. They can look at the actual proclamations. And then the TATN, the Texas AT website, has sort of some guidelines for them to ask questions of the publishers as well. The next slide just shows the state of Texas, and then there's the link to the Texas proclamations, and they have all of them by year archive. You can go back and actually look at that progression of how they made it more and more deliberate for those publishers to provide those accessible materials. You can advance it again, please. So all material acquisitions and the proclamations, that's something to know about. We actually wrote it into our education code. Texas is one of the states where you'll see AEM instead of AEM because they wrote it into the Texas Education Code like 5 years ago, and it's a little hard to change the code And so the powers that be said, we're not changing it. AIM is the same as AEM and just get over it. So we're one of the states that use it interchangeably. We also provide state test accommodations built into our online test. And then we have 3 providers of materials that districts can access at no charge to themselves. It's either contracted through the state of Texas or through other grants. And that's APH, Bookshare, and Learning Ally. So all they have to do is have a person on that campus identify the student has a reading disability, print disability, or it's broader than print, and then they have access to those materials for that student with a disability. It's a little fuzzier with our 504 students, but we're working on that in Texas. That's probably our next area of growth, I would assume. You can go ahead and advance the slide. Oh, and then I'm sorry, we're already to Iowa. I do have one thing to add. I do want to tell a little story about kind of taking it down to the district level. So that's what we have at the state, and then in Houston, and I'm sorry, in Texas, we have about 1,000 school districts, a little bit more. And in fact, in just the Houston area, we have 100 school districts and charter schools that we serve. So at the state level, there's sort of this infrastructure for this, but then as it trickles down to the district level, I noticed a lot of you put the somewhat plus. We get a lot of somewhat pluses and somewhat minuses maybe too. So that the application at the district and the campus level is not as consistent as it could be. But there was one local district I was working with, and they have a relatively small team of AT professionals supporting a relatively large district. And it's a mixed urban, suburban, mixed income, you know, your typical, we've got a little bit of everything. So it was a difficult for them to make sure it was happening in the classroom the way it should. So they said that what they would do is they would turn the responsibility providing those educational materials in an accessible format over to the campus level folks. So there was sort of a very painful year where people said, what? You're not going to come and set this up for us and figure it out and manage our digital information and things like that? I said, no, here's your resources, here's your training. But now that truly has transformed, and at that actual campus level, those are the people that are connecting to the students and getting that accessible material, following that infrastructure the state of Texas put in place. So that's kind of, I guess, a success story that I'll share. Okay, now I'm done. Thanks. Go on to Iowa.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela, for sharing all that information with us, that valuable information. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight from your presentation. I think that the way that it originated in general education and how you said that's been a big sort of component of moving the needle. So it started in general education as opposed to special education. And then those proclamations, it's something that we point to as the AIM Center when we are providing guidance. So they're a great example and have a number of components to them, including that third-party audit, which is so important. As you said, it's not enough for just the vendor to say this is accessible, but it also has to be confirmed by a third-party audit. Now, you mentioned a few sources. I have a couple of questions for you, actually 3 questions waiting in the chat area. But for Bookshare and Learning Ally, you provide some additional supports, right? Some outreach and so on throughout the state. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. So both of those entities have staff that work in the state, and we sort of have our own launch page within Learning Ally and Bookshare. So districts go to their launch page, and it's sort of tailored to Texas, so to speak. There's a lot of information on alignments to our standards, which is a big deal and you know, Texas is one of the states that has our own system. We don't use the Common Core, so it's very important to make sure that our materials are aligned to it's the Texas Essential knowledge and skills. And then, in fact, Bookshare has, I think, 4 different consultants that support Texas because Texas is so large geographically. They provide training, they provide technical assistance. I see them at all of our regional and state conferences, supporting, you know, general education, special education, and then we have an AT conference here at Region 4 as well. And I believe Learning Ally has 2, if I remember correctly. So we sort of have a little bit of personalized support for that, probably because one piece is that we have this infrastructure in place, and the other piece is because we're probably so large, they just need that many people to manage all of Texas and all of the students that access those services. I will add too that in the handout, but not in the PowerPoint, I added a link to something called the Texas Roadmap, and that takes you to the Texas AT Network website, and it's got the support materials for districts buying materials on their own, but there's also this PDF document that's a Texas Roadmap, which is sort of a little bit of a joke because Texas, big roads, got it. And it's a flow chart of how districts can acquire those materials through Learning Ally, Bookshare, and APA. So it's a sort of a support document for them to be able to sort that out for those students with print disabilities that need accessible materials. Does that answer your question?
Great. Yes. Thank you for adding that, Angela. We have a couple of questions that popped up in the chat. I think one of them you partially answered, or maybe completely answered. But Jessica wants to know, from a UDL, a Universal Design for Learning perspective, are these materials, APH, Bookshare, Learning Ally, then made available for all students?
Through the instructional materials, it is only for students with disabilities. There are some other avenues for students without disabilities, but those fiscal responsibility would lie with that either local education agency or campus might have to fund some of that. So the state will fund it for the students with disabilities, but that funding is not provided for the students without disabilities, because it can trickle down to the local level. And I'm not 100% sure about the funding source at the state. I know that there's some state allocated funds and there's some federal trickle down funds, but I'm not sure how that falls out exactly.
Right. And Kay from Florida just added in the chat that the Florida DOE has given Learning Ally a grant to provide access directly to schools. So thanks for adding that comment in the chat, Kay. Appreciate it. Brian, let's see. Brian had a question here. How do the school districts in Texas receive Learning Ally access at no cost to them? I think you partially answered that. Or?
Yeah, through the grant through TEA, and again, I'm not 100% sure on the funding source for that. It's a little complicated in Texas sometimes.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, thanks so much, Angela. And again, if you have other questions for Angela or any of our presenters, Angela's contact information was just shared in the chat. But also you can post it to the chat, and then at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to answer your questions then.
All right, thanks everybody, bye.
All right, I'm going to advance the slide and turn it over to our friends from Iowa, Joy Lyons and Maggie Prickett. Take it away. You may both be muted right now, so if you, there we go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Joy, why don't you try and test yourself to make sure you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to get us started, and just a little background on myself. I started, as Angela mentioned, she's an SLP. I started as a speech language pathologist as well, and spent a good part of my career in the public schools as an assistive technology specialist. And now I'm working with the Department of Education as the AEM coordinator. I think you'll see a contrast in how Iowa is organized compared to what you heard about Texas. Iowa is an open territory, and I would say we started kind of on the opposite, that accessible materials started in our special ed area, and now we're trying to shift it to aim for all students. So I think Maggie's going to start with some general information, and then we'll kind of talk through our different levels of activity activities in Iowa. So Maggie, take it away.
Yeah. So I'm just going to introduce myself real quick. My name is Maggie Pickett. As Joy and Angela both are, I am also a certified speech language pathologist. I started my career working as an SLP in schools and moved to become an AT specialist. I also worked at the Department of Ed as the AIM coordinator, and now I'm back at I worked in a district as their AIM coordinator, and now I'm back at a Grantwood AEA, where I started at one of our regional AEAs, or area education agencies, and in Iowa. It's kind of like a regional support center. And so the support center that I'm directly working under is Grantwood AEA. So if Luis, you could advance the slide. Wonderful. So we are talking today about Quality Indicator 7. What you see on the screen is not Quality Indicator 7. It is a model. This is Dean Fixon's model of the implementation drivers. If any of you are familiar with the National Implementation Research Network, NERN, Dean Fixon and his team have created have looked at all the science around implementing new, innovative, not innovative necessarily, but implementing new ideas, not only in education, but also in, it actually started in mental health and behavior in hospitals. And so the state of Iowa is actually utilizing the implementation drivers and other areas of Fixon's work to be the foundation of our systemic school improvement plan or process in Iowa called Collaborating for Iowa's Kids. So that's why you're seeing this. However, if you look at this model, there are different, you'll see the competence or the drivers on each side of the triangle. So leadership is on the base of the triangle, competency drivers on the left side of the triangle, and then organizational drivers. What's interesting is that Quality Indicator 7 aligns directly to some of these supports or some of these components of the drivers, as well as other quality indicators for AIM. So if you want to advance now, we'll show you how that kind of model resonates within our systemic school improvement plan. So on the screen now, you're looking at what we call our educational cascade. So this cascade actually is, it's another one of Fixon's models. Each individual component, so each individual rectangle, the classroom starting at the base of the cascade, working up to the school level, and then the district level, and then the regional agency, and then the state agency is one component. They're each components of our educational cascade. And so in Iowa, we have tried very strategically to implement the policy to practice loop. Again, that's a NERN, a National Implementation Research Network model that was developed. But what this does within Collaborating for Iowa's Kids is it focuses efficiency and coherency from the capital at the state education agency all the way down to the classroom. So that as we move new innovative practices throughout our system, we are ensuring that they get down to the classroom and implemented with our kids. And so this was actually Collaborating for Iowa's Kids was started in 2011. And most recently, we have started implementing through this support chain a multi-tiered system of supports, so an MTSS. And for those of you familiar with MTSS, it is an all education, all ed system. So we don't necessarily talk about gen ed or special ed or it's an all ed system. All kids are being served within a multi-tiered system of supports. And so creating accessibility supports and services to address all learner needs starts with this type of infrastructure where we can start to kind of look at good best practice at the state agency and start to feed all of that information and good training and support down to our classrooms. And so if you look at this cascade, you'll notice that those green arrows, there are some arrows on the top of the cascade that focus downward. So those are the state agency providing support to the regional education agency, or our AEAs. And our AEAs providing support to our districts, and our districts to our schools, and our schools to our classrooms. But on the opposite side of this cascade, you'll see other arrows that go up. That's feedback. That's opportunity for districts to say what's not working in our classrooms for our kids, and that feedback is meant to make its way up to the level by which it can be addressed. And so that's the critical part that we wanted to just illustrate here, is that when we start to kind of address accessibility supports and aim for all within this cascade, these organizational drivers or these quality indicators, especially quality indicator 7, has to be addressed at every layer of this cascade in order for this to kind of work and be implemented in a way where we reduce the barriers to support our students and our educators in the classroom. So if you advance another slide, we are going to kind of take a peek at each layer of that cascade. And so Joy's going to start with the state education agency, and then we'll kind of work our way down the cascade from there.
Yeah, so at the organizational level, we're working to make some changes in the system as a whole. And one of the ways that we're doing that at the department is through a team that we call the Access Coordination Team. And that's made up of state leaders in assistive technology, in AIM, and some folks from the Department of Ed, our special education director, and some program consultants. And this team has just been working together for a couple of years. So we're finally figuring out exactly the kinds of things that we want to do. But basically, what the intent is to coordinate accessibility activities across a broad range of stakeholder groups, such as curriculum leaders and media leaders, technology directors, and other educational technology staff. And we've identified 3 priorities for this team as far as our focus for coordination activities. And those include working on changing the philosophy of educators and parents to understand that the use of technology increases personalized access, participation, and performance for all learners. Another priority area is for districts and our AEAs, or regional education agencies, to procure accessible materials. And the third is looking at students using personalized learning and technology tools to actively participate and demonstrate in their throughout their educational day. And so that's kind of the system intervention that we're working on. And again, we're not doing, we're just coordinating the activities that all these other groups in the state are working on. So everybody has the best information and knows what everybody is doing. Another area that we are working in is technical leadership. And in general, actually, we're addressing the motivation of stakeholders to embrace AIM for all students, working to see that they have an understanding that it's part of everybody's work to make this happen. And specifically, we wanted to mention a study that we're doing this spring using the UPAR, which that's a protocol for accommodations in reading, but the online version. And looking at that to acquire data so we can consider at the state level providing statewide access to this diagnostic tool. As I mentioned, Iowa is an open territory, so there's not a direct funding stream to the districts for this, but we've seen some pretty important impact with the districts that have used UPAR as part of their work with struggling readers. And so we want to get a little bit more documentation and data for the Director of Special Ed to make a decision about whether that's something that she could provide to all the districts for at least for 1 year. And then the other area that I wanted to mention was incompetency, because Iowa has a professional development grant, a SPDIG, and within some usability sites, we've been providing professional learning on specially designed instruction for literacy. And within that, we're addressing awareness and the importance of accessibility in each strand of that work. So we've got a strand for K-6 learners, one for early childhood, and one for students with significant disabilities. And there's been professional learning, but also a big part of that grant is building a coaching support system that will be ongoing. We're going to scale that up starting next year, and that's going to expand the work from the usability sites into targeted districts around the state. And that is requiring commitment from the regional education agencies and districts that are going to be involved to use the tools and the coaching plan that's been developed over the past 3 years. So having AIM and accessibility as part of that general education sort of initiative, in particular in the K-6 strand, that's going to move that work forward, we're hoping. So, Louise, if you want to go to the next slide, Maggie's going to talk a little bit about more specifics.
Yeah. So, Joy, thanks for covering kind of all that work that's ongoing at the state level. So, Grant Wood is one of, is it 7 or 9? Area education agencies across the state of Iowa that support regionally the districts that are within their region. And so Grantwood AEA is one of 9 districts, or one of 9 AEAs. And what's the reason why I'm standing here and none of my counterparts are in our other AEAs is because the state, the ACT, the Access Coordination Team, has kind of tapped Grantwood to say, systemically, how could this look if we were to do access or AIM for all, meaning that we provide these supports and these tools to all students? How might this look, and what are the system level kind of implementation type things that we need to be focused on at an agency and at a district? And so we've been tasked to kind of problem solve some of that, and so as we kind of think about that educational cascade at the AEA level, the first thing we had to do when we kind of got tasked with that job was to look at our current structures. We did not get any additional funding. I don't think anybody in education right now is getting additional funding, but we're making do with what we have. And so we've got a lot of great teams across kind of cross-collaborative teams. So we looked at who could we tap on to kind of champion this work and be motivated to move this work forward. And so we've identified a group of stakeholders. We call it our implementation team. And so those folks come together on a monthly basis, and we address some of those infrastructure barriers and some of the leadership stuff at that level. And that team is made up of me personally. Along with 2 of my colleagues, we're digital learning consultants. We are paid solely through general education funds. And so we are leading that work. It's not a special education initiative in our agency. It is an all ed initiative and work. We also have assistive technologists, AAC team members, instructional. We have folks from our literacy team. We have folks on our ELL specialist. So we have this really awesome group of diverse thinkers who are supporting a broad range of learners come together on a monthly basis. What we also do is we have been supporting a few of our local districts who have taken on this work as well. And the people on that team are also supporting those local districts on a very regular basis to support some of the decision making. Again, addressing those 3 drivers within Fixon's model, or Quality Indicator 7, and other quality indicators within their work. And so I think that's really essential. Number 1, this is not funded through special education. This is an all ed system. But number 2, we are coordinating not only with our districts that we're supporting, but we're also coordinating with the state. So those are 2 really kind of critical pieces that I think help make that cascade really efficient. The next thing is kind of thinking about all of those folks that we have brought together on our team. Their job, their role is to start to broaden this work. And so once we feel like we're in a place where we can start to move the content and move the knowledge forward and move the implementation forward. So we're just building capacity right now within our AEA, supporting those districts who have been doing this work. And as soon as we feel like we can, we are going to be taking that out to every single person in our AEA. And right now we have, you'll see on our screen, we have an agency goal that speaks directly to accessibility. Doesn't speak to AIM per se, but accessibility in general. And so having just an agency goal that addresses accessibility is a big shift for our staff, and it helps address our first goal. And that's, I think Joy had mentioned, to address that mind shift, that this is not a special education thing. This is an all-ed thing, and this is part of everybody's job. And so being part of our agency goal is, it's really, really essential for us. The other component that we, so within that agency goal, in order to kind of implement and move this content forward, we need to make sure that we're walking the walk, that the materials that we're designing and creating and sending out into the world are accessible, but not only the ones that we're designing, also the ones that we're purchasing. We get a lot of funds to purchase materials that go out and support our districts, whether they're students or our educators or our staff. And so we need to make sure that we have processes and procedures in place that we are procuring and designing with accessibility in mind. And then the fourth goal that we have is looking at this from an instructional level. Our job, our sole job as an area education agency is to support our districts. And so thinking about how we can establish some of this work within a multi-tiered system of support. And again, we're building internal capacity now so that we can move that forward. I think this is, so for us, just having that goal, having those three kind of outcomes to address that goal, but also having the infrastructure and having this be an all-ed thing and not a special ed thing has really been beneficial, not only for the districts that have moved it forward, but also as we start to look to the future and move this content out with other folks. Luis, you can advance if you'd like. So that brings us to the next layer of the educational cascade, the district level. This is the state of Iowa. You can see Grantwood AEA over there in the eastern part, but we have a lot of other AEAs supporting so many other districts across the state. And so what needs to be addressed in these districts, we're starting to kind of pinpoint exactly what that is with the support of the AIM Center, as well as just working really closely with some of these folks. And one of the critical things that I think often historically we have left off is the administrative level. The people who can address Quality Indicator 7 with the fiscal and human resources and identifying time to support professional learning. These are things that have often, we've just kind of, as an agency, skipped over. And some of our colleagues in our other AEAs might say the same thing. But we've learned that when we can, again, create that very fluid cascade by addressing and working with district and school leadership teams, we can really coordinate those efforts from a systems standpoint. So those districts that have implemented an implementation team and provided systemic infrastructure around training and have done so in a way that fits their district, they are moving forward with their data and getting kids what they need. How do we know they're getting kids what they need? Well, again, we go back to this is an all-ed system. Many of these districts are moving this work forward for all kids, but they are ensuring that their students with disabilities get access to the content that they need in a usable format. And so we know that from the documentation on our IEPs, from just kind of system level indicators, their technology plans, their school improvement plans. All of these indicators have shifted from being a very special ed thing to now we're just focused on all kids, but look at when we focus on all kids, we have ensured that our kids with disabilities get what they need. So it's really kind of been cool to watch that growth in some of that indicator data is what we're calling it. So that's been the work for those districts that are part of that cascade. And now you're sitting out there in the audience right now and you're living in Iowa and you're working this work and you're like, wait a second, that's not how it's going for me. Perhaps not. But what you need to know is that we are working very hard to begin to coordinate and articulate that system so that all kids, and there's an equitable, we're addressing it equitably, like Joy was saying earlier, so that no matter where you go, no matter what agency you go to, district you go to, school you go to, you're getting your needs met. And so that educational cascade is really allowing us to have that fluid conversation from the Capitol to the classroom. And Joy, I'll toss it over to you to kind of.
We just wanted to reiterate the establishing support at the top from the access coordination team and really building that connective tissue between the levels of the cascade is really helping us align and articulate the structure to expand and address quality indicator 7. So Louise, take it from here.
It would help if I unmuted myself. Thanks so much, Maggie and Joy. That was a great insight into what's going on in Iowa. I want to invite everybody to share your questions, any comments that you have for Joy or Maggie in the chat area. In the meantime, I just want to highlight a couple of things that stood out for me. I love that idea of the cascade, and I kept thinking top down, bottom up. So information, resources have to flow in both directions for you to have a successful system. And then another thing that you kept saying, Maggie, that I loved, and I even shared it in the chat, is it's an ed thing. So it's not a special ed or a general ed thing. It's just an ed thing. And our goal is having good outcomes for all learners, including those that have disabilities or other learning challenges. So I appreciated you emphasizing that. So let's see if we have any questions or comments. Angela added adding the administrative piece is huge, and she put in a little smiley face there. So if you have any questions for, not just for Joy and Maggie, but for Angela as well, please feel free to share those in the chat at this time. We have a few minutes before the end of the webinar. And as a reminder, the slides and the digital handout from this webinar, they'll be posted on the event page. That's the same place where you register for the webinar. That's also where the recording will be posted in about a week once we've had a chance to caption it, closed caption it. Jane has a question. Would working with one district at a time be the best way to go to really implement the project when it is just one person in charge? And I guess that goes for all of you, Angela, Maggie, Joy. What do you think?
I'll just say that from Iowa's work, we started with usability sites, and so there, I don't know, Maggie, maybe you know how many sites we have around the state, but we started with some district sites and then one AEA to kind of create a model and do some problem solving about how things can be scaled up. And then that's where we are now, that once we have some of those things worked out, so the system is a little bit smoother, we can move it out to some targeted districts.
Yeah.
AEAs.
So Joy, I just want to elaborate on one thing you noted, and I think it goes back to this kind of implement the project when it's just one person in charge. Joy mentioned something called usability. Usability is something in Iowa that we have used, again, in connection to collaborating for Iowa's kids and our state personnel development grant, the SPDIG. As we think about putting together new content that we want to move forward within that educational cascade. It's essential to get feedback on the front end, to trial it. It's almost like a trial. We don't call them pilots in the state of Iowa, we call them usability. And so we work through usability. We get a lot of feedback from districts and AEAs so that what we package and put together can be rolled out in multiple ways, whether it's kind of like an anytime, anywhere kind of, you can go get your learning on a module, you can go get your support from your AEA. And so the way that we've been doing it is our way of addressing usability, as Joy said, and really kind of connecting what are those critical components that we need to have in place. And we have great information from the AIM Center, but we want to know how this looks in Iowa. And so once we kind of get that package that Joy had mentioned together, then that will be put together from a state perspective and provided out in a way that's more comprehensive, I think is the word I might be looking for, instead of that one at a time, one by one. Although one by one, you can get through some districts and some get some kids what they need going one-to-one too. So, but we've just found this is a nice way to systemically and systematically address a larger pot of needs with a little more work on the front end.
So would it be fair to say that it's kind of a problem-solving method? You try to solve some of these issues, on a smaller scale, and then as you learn from that, you try to scale it up
Absolutely.
the cascade.
Yep.
So this is Angela, and each region has an AT person that is a member of that Texas AT network. And then at the regions, we have leadership networks on various topics. So there is an AT leadership network that I manage here at Region 4, and pretty much every district sends an AT member to that meeting. We have 3 meetings a year. So in my region in Houston, well, we do charter schools and districts separate, but I have 50 and 50, more or less. And we can disseminate information to that group that then can then take it back to their district to put it in place. Now, again, I mentioned before, there's varying degrees of success in implementing that at the campus and district levels. Then, so the TATN group provides resources to those others, consultants at the other education service centers, and then they can then disseminate it to their leadership networks. There's kind of an infrastructure for that. And then additionally, TATN has training modules, and we also have a project we do every year that's kind of a across the state project. Like, for example, this year, our training is looking at the built-in tools and ubiquitous supports that are built into the system softwares for Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Remember the other one for a minute. So what's already on my gadget that I can use to support literacy. So a lot of those AIM pieces will fall into that, and a lot of those UDL pieces will fall into that. We sort of have a mechanism to get some of these ideas out. Now, once they're at that local level.
Uh-oh, it looks like we lost you there, Angela.
That was weird. I'm not sure what happened. So it's just a continuum of success and less success is what I said.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Sorry we lost you there for a second. Again, we have a few minutes, actually a couple of minutes. So before we let you go, we wanted to get you to reflect a little bit on what you've heard today. So this is your opportunity to take some of what you've heard and then place it in your own context. So I want to ask you, what will be your first actions toward allocating resources for AIM and accessible technologies? So remember that Quality Indicator 7 is about fiscal, infrastructural, human resources that will help you build a robust system for the provision of AIM. So what will be your next action? And the photo here shows a person jumping over from, looks like one hill to another. So what will be your first action that you take, or an action that you will take towards building a robust system? Or how will you apply what you've learned today in your own context? How does it apply to it? be shy. While you're thinking about that, we do have a tool that's being developed right now. It's a progress monitoring tool in order to allow districts to self-assess on their progress towards implementing the quality indicators and the critical components that go along with them. So that's something that we want you to be on the lookout for sometime this summer. We're working on a name for it because progress monitoring tool doesn't really inspire excitement. So these are some of the options that we've come up with so far. Access solution, track accessibility, accessible. If you have any ideas, feel free to contact us, and we'd appreciate your input in naming that tool so that it's something that's catchy and also meaningful and descriptive. So let's see, a few of you have shared here. Brian shares looking into, as a district person, building up our own people to access what has already been built by the state. Some aren't knowledgeable of what to do. So definitely building on what's already there is always a good idea rather than reinventing the wheel. And then Jane posted, get information out to more admin people about putting the poor information. That's those 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we have information about that on the AIM Center website to the districts, so that accessibility is not just for special ed. So again, that's sort of what Maggie kept saying. It's an ed thing. So how do we make it an ed thing? That's great. All right, everybody. So we're right at 4 o'clock. I want to remind you that we do have a survey that we would love for you to complete and give us some feedback on this webinar. You can also contact me if you have any questions or comments. allperez@cas.org. You can also find me on Twitter if that's a better way for you to contact me. I'm at Ionaxis, EYEONAXS. And finally, if you could just take a second to complete our evaluation for this webinar, that would be great. And that link is going to be posted in the chat, but just in case, it's bit.ly/AEM QI Part 5. And that's case sensitive. I see that Leslie has posted the link in the chat. So a big thank you to Leslie for taking care of the links in the chat. Really appreciate it. And a big thank you to Mary for providing our captions today. Your work really makes the webinars work for everyone. So we appreciate that. All right, with that, I will say sign off and thank you all. Thanks to our presenters, to Angela, Maggie, Joy, for taking time out of your busy schedules to share some of your insights with us and some of your work. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you all on the upcoming AIM Center webinar. Take care, everybody.